and welcome to Frontline Conversations. I am your host for this episode, Amit Baruah. General N.C. Vijs was the Chief of Army Staff from December 2002 to January 2005. He was also Director General of Military Operations of India in 1999, when India and Pakistan fought to clear the intrusion in Kargil from Pakistan. And General Vijs has done us a favor by writing this book. It's called Alone in the Ring, Decision Making in Critical Times. I don't think the blurb could have put it better. This decision making in critical times is so important, not just for those who are involved in it, but for the people on whom the repercussions come. And if I may say, I was the Hindu's correspondent and Frontline's correspondent in 99 in Pakistan, and I had the privilege of reporting the Kargil War for my newspaper and for Frontline. General Vijay's account, which is most interesting, gives us an insight as to how these decisions were taken. I'm particularly interested not just in Kargil, of course, but also the decision on why the Vajpayee government finally decided not to send troops to Iraq. So these are some of the issues that we'll touch on during the conversation. Welcome to Frontline Conversations, General Vijs.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Baruah, for getting me over to your show. Let's see how much do we enjoy the conversation.
Yeah. General Vijs, my first question to you. You mention on page 15 of your book that India reacted with more restraint than necessary during the Kargil conflict and did not allow military operations across the line of control. It's a pretty significant point that you make. But that did win us a lot of friends internationally, the fact that we didn't cross the LOC. Almost 26 years later, we are in June. You all were fighting at that time, in June of 1999. How do you look at this issue? How do you balance this not crossing, this restraint, with the friends that we won internationally and the isolation that Pakistan suffered?
See, these are two different times, 1999 and now the present period, two different times and two different situations. That time we had just done the nuclear experiment and we had become a nuclear power, and India wanted to look a very responsible part of the world. I'm telling you on the government's payout, not that the army was with that kind of a decision. We were not, the wars are fought by the governments, not by the armies alone. Armies are an instrument of war. Right. And secondly, we didn't want to do anything. The government didn't want to do anything where perhaps the world thought that India is not a responsible power. And that was very important. And thirdly, they had a perhaps somewhere lurking at the back of their mind a fear of a nuclear response from Pakistan. So these were the factors perhaps which the government was thinking. As far as the today's scenario is concerned, is entirely different. Both are nuclear power still. There is still a worry of nuclear response, but the government has made up their mind that the Pakistanis are using it as an instrument of spreading their terrorism and also taking full advantage of it. And there's no doubt on that. That's absolutely correct. So on that account, they've said, okay, we try and keep the things to below a particular threshold and use our systems. Then secondly, what you would have seen in Operation Sindoor, they've announced very clearly that we are now gone after the 9 camps, but our threat is proportionate. Our actions are very rational. We've only gone for the terrorists. We've not gone for any other Pakistani institution or the armed forces. So that precaution has been taken even now. So, but two different things. That time, strategic restraint was one of our major issues that we'll exercise strategic restraint. But today, we've said, okay, strategic restraint, but controlled escalation. Controlled escalation. We'll go up the ladder to a controlled escalation, and which we did. The moment we hit the 9 camps, we announced it very clearly that we have only gone after the terrorist camp, but the escalation was done by the Pakistanis, not by us.
General Vijs, on that point, just to bring you back, in 99, India won many friends during Kargil. We never had the spectacle of parliamentary delegations touring the world after Kargil. It was as if India won a lot of friends by its policy of restraint. So possibly the policy of restraint can cut two ways. It can create problems for military operations, but it can win friends internationally. How do you look at this issue?
You see, again, a lot of time has gone by, 26 years gone by. The media has also changed. Media has changed so much that everything which you do, the moment you sneeze, it is reported. So we had to make sure that we have a very good narrative, because now any war which is being fought has two parts of it. One is on the strategic aspect, which is the war fighting, and second is the story building, the narrative. The narrative has become a very major issue today, and it is how you people put across. And that's where I think perhaps, as we discuss later, we need to have machinery which is on the spot 24 hours dedicated to it to give our narrative to the world. Perhaps, uh, perhaps, I do not know, people better than me will be able to comment on it in a better way. That our narrative somewhere in between we slackened off. So there was a requirement to make up for that, and our delegations went. And in any case, when you saw the response of the world, everybody was, even if he was sympathetic to you, he kept it quite muted and kept, that you should finish this war. There's a problem of nuclear, and we must have a restraint, and we must solve the problem. Now, these are the lectures which don't help us. We want to convey to the world that we are suffering from terrorism at the hands of Pakistanis. And terrorism is also a threat to the world, which no more less than Americans must know it well. They suffered in 9/11. And then they fought in Afghanistan for any number of years and went back in a bit of a, I will say, not in a very happy situation. So the world should have seen that, but perhaps it hasn't sunk with them because it does not hurt them. It hurts us. So that's why we are so very keen on it. And a very good thing which the government did was to send this delegation. And delegations of all faiths, all parties. It was not delegations of the government. These were the delegations in the country of all faiths and all parties. So it was a delegation which represented India and represented India very, very well.
General Saab, since you had the benefit of seeing Kargil and you have the benefit of seeing Operation Sindoor, as a one-time leader of the Indian Army, would you say what are the main changes that have taken place from Kargil to Operation Sindoor, from Operation Vijay to Operation Sindoor?
Yes, a lot has changed. Again, a lot has changed because you see, that time the government gave us the orders not to cross the line of control. We were asked to take Kargil only and not go elsewhere. Given an option, we perhaps wouldn't have gone to the Kargil area. We would have gone to, there were many other areas in the POK which would have been far easier to pluck, and perhaps then come to Kargil in a later stage.
Was this proposal made to the government by you at that time?
Yes. Everything was discussed behind the door, not in the open. Obviously, the discussions don't get discussed outside. Everything was told to them, but they felt that, look, our case would be stronger if we retake Kargil. So we did that. And Kargil, if those of us who have been to those areas will see that these hills are absolutely straight up, and there are no flanks from where you can approach. So very difficult objectives. But now this time, the government gave you a free hand. Every time we have gone, upgraded the response. You see, we did surgical strike, went just a few kilometers from across the line of control. After that, but what happened? Thereafter, the Balakot happened. From Balakot, we have now come to this level where we have multiplied that by 9 times and increased our response and gone straight for the terrorist targets, not only in the POK area, but in the heartland of Punjab. And we've gone to their main camps, both to Jaish and the elite. So there has been a world of change. We have used aircraft. Earlier, the first time we did only with the foot troops. So we have upgraded our response. That's why the Prime Minister, at the end of this operation, had given very, very important statement about the India's chain doctrine on this.
So, would you say that air power, UAVs, drones, are these going to be the instruments of modern warfare, like we see in Ukraine as well?
Yes, these are very much the instruments of future, and they will be used heavily. But that does not reduce the importance or the role of the army and the navy. As a matter of fact, our navy was in a very good position to take on Karachi. They didn't do it. There was no requirement to do it. Otherwise, they would have perhaps done it. And the army, in any case, were deployed on the ground to hold the border and also contributed in many other ways. Even your integrated air defense has the army's contribution. So all three services will remain important. But yes, drones and standoff targets. These two are major additions. Both the forces did cross the line of control, but both fired the standoff missiles and used those. So the warfare is changing. Some people are using a terminology of no contact war. Well, I am an infantry. I don't believe in that. It's a no contact at a certain stage. But ultimately, if you have to fight a war, the contact is inevitable. There will be ultimately the army on the ground because then only you can capture the areas. If you want to capture the areas, if those are permissible within the restraints of a nuclear background.
General Vijay, you mentioned earlier during Kargil also, it had been 1 year since the Indian and Pakistanis had tested. And all these conflicts, skirmishes, whatever you call, whether it is post Pahalgam or whether it was in Kargil, took place under a kind of a nuclear umbrella. Now, how much, rationality should we give to the other side that if push comes to shove, they will not use the ultimate option? How can we believe that they will act rationally?
You see, the Pakistanis have not stated their nuclear threshold. Nobody has. Nobody does. But their DG Lieutenant General Kidwai, who was also advisor to the National Command Authority, has mentioned four things, which are very reasonable. We can also assess those. One is the territorial integrity. Any part of their country lost will be a problem. These also talked of the destruction of their forces. If you destroy their main strike forces, that will be a problem. If you destabilize that country politically, there will be a problem. If you also economically stagnate them, there will be a problem. So these four are very well stated arguments from their side. He's conveyed it because he was the man who was the advisor to the command authority, and he must have been asked to state it so that the other side is clear. There is a threshold, but you can operate below that threshold. That's what we did. At that time when I was in service, we had started the Cold Start doctrine. That also I've given the reason why the Cold Start doctrine had to come through. And we had said, okay, we'll make shallow bridgeheads to start with. Shallow bridgeheads so that we remain there below their nuclear threshold. So nuclear threshold is an issue. If you try and take their territory, it has to be in a manner that it does not hurt them that much where they lose a face, which is beyond redemption.
Well, on that point, General Vijs, India has also put the Indus Waters Treaty in abeyance. And the chairman of Pakistan's Joint Chiefs of Staff Committee, in an interview he gave to Reuters in Singapore, he has said that this constitutes an existential threat to Pakistan. Do you feel that this is one of the nuclear triggers that Pakistan will be looking at, or is it more of a threat?
As a matter of fact, if I may say, Pakistan has always considered India as an existential threat for them. That has been their approach all along. As far as we in the Indian armed forces are concerned, I remember from my younger days, we were always told that a stable Pakistan is in our interest. So I have grown up in my life hearing this analogy only and this logic only. But on the other hand, Pakistan has always felt that they are under existential threat. But yes, water poses them a threat. And I'm glad that for the first time, after discussing it for many years, that Indus Water Treaty is an instrument which needs to be changed. It needs to be changed because it was drawn over 60 years back under different circumstances. Now, so much has changed. The population profile has changed. Our requirements have changed. Our own requirements have changed. So there is a requirement to revise this. And I'm glad the Prime Minister has put it on the table and very clearly had said that we will do it. And we have also held it at abeyance. We are open to discussion. But it has to be discussed, it has to be resolved. They may say anything, but that's not correct. They are being unreasonable. We've been suggesting amendments to this for many years, but they are not responding even. They don't listen to that. So somewhere you have to tighten the screws. And I'm glad the Indus Water Treaty is on the table very much.
And let's come to the media part of it. You know, what you mentioned at the outset is as important to fight the war and as to build a story around what you're doing. Do you feel by not...
If I may interrupt you. True story. Indians put a true story only.
Of course.
Our own media will not give a wrong story.
Right.
Unlike the Pakistanis.
Yeah. So the point I'm making, General Saab, is that during the first couple of days of Operation Sindoor, Pakistanis were complaining, claiming that, you know, they had downed some of our jets. The international Reuters news agency also claimed that 3 of our jets had come down. But it took our, Air Marshal a few days to come out and say, yes, we had suffered losses, but all our pilots are safe. And then General Chauhan also, the new CDS, he made a reference to this in Singapore. Do you think that by delaying this announcement, it gave us kind of a propaganda advantage to Pakistan in those critical 2-3 days?
There are two aspects to it. Firstly, losses are part of any operation. You can't fight a war without losses, right? So that we should put aside as to why have we lost. And we also did it under certain conditions and under certain restraint. Perhaps we didn't want to do anything other than hitting the targets and not suppress their air defense, which we should have done, for which it would have been a little different action. Yes, perhaps we should have done it on the day one, but during the war, you are not discussing your losses. It so happened that this war has been only for 4 days. So it looked too small a period, and we feel we should have, on the first day, we should have mentioned our losses. Did we mention them during Kargil War? No. During Kargil War, during the operation, you were not mentioning your losses. You were talking of day-to-day bodies coming back to Delhi because we were going through proper...
during Kargil, I remember we lost 2 MiG aircraft.
Yes.
Squadron leader Ahuja and Flight Lieutenant Nachiketa, who landed in Pakistani territory and was captured. So, in that sense, we were not going to deny or confirm because it was evident. The point I'm trying to ask you is that, does it serve any purpose not to admit? Isn't it like once the Air Marshal came out and spoke, I mean, it was clear that this, as you said, I was reading in your book that we lost almost 550 soldiers and men during Kargil. That's a lot of people, but it's good to be upfront and mention it. As you said, when you fight a war, losses are part of it.
Yes. That I will tend to agree with you that on the first day itself, perhaps we could have done it, or second day, third day, we could have done it. It perhaps would have served the purpose better. But the Air Marshal who spoke, Air Marshal Bharti, he made one thing very clear, and he gave a hint of that all pilots are safe.
Yes,
all pilots are back. So obviously, the unspoken part was that some aircraft have been lost. It was very obvious to anybody. Perhaps we could have mentioned the number of aircraft lost.
And General Vijs, since we are talking about your book,
and may I just,
please,
permit me, the Pakistanis have also not mentioned their losses. They have also lost 9-10. They have also lost 9-10 aircraft, which they have not mentioned, but our side have now started talking about it. And perhaps more clarification will come on that.
Right. So, well, we'll have to watch that space for what happens. Yes. The other thing I wanted to ask you, when those MiGs came down in Kargil, was there a lot of pressure on the armed forces, on the political leadership to hit back that day? Because when I was in Islamabad, I was listening later to these stories that there was a lot of pressure to hit back and Prime Minister Vajpayee resisted that pressure. Could you shed some light on this?
You see, at that time, when the aircraft came down, first we used helicopters, easy target. Then we were flying at low heights. Then the Air Force changed their tactics. Not crossing the line of control to remain a part of the conditionality. So there you could change nothing. So what we had to do was to change our own tactics. So Air Force changed their own tactics. They started going up. They were going beyond 20,000 feet, where the missiles couldn't reach. And also, in the meanwhile, we had also got the guided munitions and which we were using. So pressure was there. Naturally, the loss of aircraft was, and helicopters and aircraft was not very welcome news. And it was a bit of a demoralizing effect at that point in time. But that was only for a couple of days. And after that, the Air Force changed their tactics. And they flew 550 sorties of fighters after that with no loss. So Operation Sindoor on that account was a great success. Yes, the change of tactics midway through had to be done. Right. And for which we were equipped also.
Right. One couple of other questions relating to your book. One is you mentioned in 2004, when there was an effort to resolve the dispute with Pakistan about a, coordinated withdrawal from the Siachen Glacier. Yes. And you quote then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh telling you that, General, you're being very hawkish, So could you recall, what was the context and in what context did then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh make that remark?
You see, after the Congress government came to power, they held a meeting in the MO Ops room, our military operations operation room. And there was a consideration by the government that in order to reduce tension and temperatures on both sides, it will be good to pull back troops a little on both sides. Now, what our short point was that, look, if you pull back, say, hypothetically 5 kilometers on our side and 5 kilometers on the Pakistan side, there's a world of difference. The distance may be same. For us to get back to those 5 kilometers, which we have to walk, it may take us more than a day and a half. Pakistanis will be there in an hour or two. Now, if under those circumstances, we said the fact which has to be taken into consideration is that Pakistanis cannot be trusted. And one had experienced the Pakistanis enough, more than enough, by that time to understand that well, that whatever they say is a pack of lies and they will do what they want to do and you will be left high and dry. So we suggested to the Prime Minister that we should not do that. If we have to do, firstly, we should not do it. Siachen is far too important. We just don't want to risk Siachen, and it's very difficult to recapture any part of Siachen. It's such heights when it is occupied. And what we need to do is, if we have to pull back, if your hands are so tight, then let us do it in terms of time. And two reasons we gave him for that. One was that even when our Prime Minister Vajpayee was there in Lahore Bas Yatra in February 1999, the Pakistanis were already intruding into Kargil. And on one time, Lahore Declaration was being signed. That is the nature of that country. And that is the audacity kind with which they operate. And number two was, we said, look, the infiltration is still taking place. And when I was in service, rather in that position, the infiltration was taking place in a very big way. We were almost having 3,000 odd terrorists inside the valley at that time, valley and Jammu. So, and infiltration cannot take place unless the Pakistan army themselves are actively supporting it. And what they do, they bring the terrorists to the forward areas, make them see the forward areas over the night and get familiarized with the area, because the movement had to be at night. With all these reasons, we were not with the government's proposal to withdraw in terms of distances and all that. When I told this to Dr. Manmohan Singh, he said, General, you are being very hawkish. Well, fine. And the Prime Minister can say, but coming it from Dr. Manmohan Singh, who was so polite and soft-spoken, it was many degrees more than that. So we said, okay, sir, but that is not the question. We are professional. It is our duty. And we are bound by that we tell you the truth, and tell you the truth absolutely without mincing any words. so that there is no lack of understanding on your part as to what we are playing with fire, right? It's very kind of Dr.
And did he take your advice, sir?
Well, I'll tell you the story, the balance of the story.
Right.
When we told him that, he was very kind. He said, okay, General, if that is so, where can we discuss this aspect further? We want to discuss it amongst ourselves. I said, most welcome, sir, you come. I took him to the DGMO's office, my old office of 6 years back, and which is just next to, touching the ops room. And they sat down for half an hour, came back after half an hour, and said, okay, we have thought over it. I think we'll drop the idea. And they dropped the idea at that time. And he very much took the suggestion which we had given him. And here is a very important point, very, very important point, and that is that between the government and the armed forces, there must be a very good professional rapport, very good professional rapport. It is the duty of the armed forces to tell them the absolute truth without any mincing any words. And it is the job of the government to listen to that professional advice very seriously. What they decide ultimately is their choice. But this rapport and understanding with each other must exist. And if you have time, I'll give you one example of that. Right. If you remember, General Beckmaster, Lieutenant General Beckmaster, who was Trump's first NSA, who was also sacked subsequently, like many of his NSAs, had written a book, Dereliction of Duty, The Five Silent Men. And in that he had said that the five silent men, the five chairmen, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, did not have a personal rapport with the government, as a result of which they suffered in Vietnam very badly. I agree with them 100%. But instead of the word personal, in my book, I have specifically laid emphasis on professional rapport, because personal is too personalized. I think it should be professional. And I personally believe in that.
Right. Staying with your book and staying with inputs to prime ministers and political leaders, one interesting chapter that you have is on Iraq and the kind of pressures that were there from the Americans for India to deploy its troops in support of the American troops who actually, and of course, we know now that the fig leaf of weapons of mass destruction was a very genuine fig leaf. Nothing of the sort was found by international inspectors. And for weeks and months, India debated whether or not India should deploy those troops. And I remember a Bengali newspaper reported from Washington at that time in bold headlines that a decision to send the troops had been taken to Iraq. However, we know that the story turned out quite differently, and the newspaper in question probably jumped the gun. In your book, you make a couple of interesting points that A, our troops would have been mercenary. B, the Americans were looking for cheap soldiers. The cost of deployment would be less. And another couple of interesting points that you make is that there was no UN sanction for those troops. So how are our troops to be deployed? So do tell us, you also wrote a couple of letters to the then political leadership, saying that you wrote to the political leadership saying that this was a bad idea, I think, in a sense. You do mention that you couldn't trace those letters eventually. So what is can you tell us what kind of interactions you had, and did your letters finally swing the decision on not to send the troops to Iraq?
Right. When we were told that by the government, and I remember that at that time, Mr. Rumsfeld, who was the Secretary of Defense, made 2 visits to India, and we had meeting in the Defense Minister's office at that time, Mr. John Fernandez. And the point was, firstly, we were ourselves operationally very heavily occupied. We were in the process of building up a fence, which was 740 kilometers long, starting from zero height to going up to Jojila, 14,000. So we had no time. Number 2, we had experience of Sri Lanka behind us, where we felt that operating in somebody else's country is a different ballgame altogether. Number 3 issue was that why should we fight under anybody else's flag, where we have no control, we are only instruments to be used. And points of this kind, which then I wrote to the Prime Minister and to the Defense Minister both, a letter before the CCS meeting was held. In the CCS meeting, the Cabinet Committee of Security, everybody gave his views. And before that, I must mention also, there were 2-3 views which were floating around. One was MEA. MEA view I'll leave out because I'm not very sure authentically as to what was their view. But strategic community at that time was very strongly in favor of sending troops to Iraq. Strategic community, they had their own reason. Number one was that India will increase its influence in the world domain.
But this strategic community is also very pro-American in our country.
Yes, they were. Some of them were very pro-American also. Some of them were and vocal. And number two was that will give us an opportunity to get into the Security Council, which has always remained India's desire, and very rightly so. And the third thing which they were wanting to say was that Mr. Bush, when Mr. Advani went to US during that period, had walked into their meeting and told him that he will tell General Musharraf to lay off Kashmir. And with all these points, they were arguing that we should go in, but we stuck to our issues and we mentioned that we should not go in. Then I wrote a letter to the defense minister also. After the CCS meeting where I gave my views, as we are all asked to give our views, the Prime Minister said only one word. And that was very interesting, Chintan karenge. And one word summing up, Chintan karenge, and the meeting broke off. And after that, of course, after a month and a half, the decision was taken that no troops will be sent. Now, Mr. Baruah, I cannot say for sure whether it was our recommendation which swung the issue, a decision, or was that one of the very important points which the government took into account. I'm sure they would have given credence to it. But nobody came back and told us that it is because of you. But the fact is, which I mentioned earlier also, and at the cost of reputation, I'll say again, that look, we did our duty. We told them what we felt was right. And stuck to it. Stuck to it. Because after I came back from CCS, I had again returned to the defense minister this time. That, look, this is what I have stated, and please take that into account. And number two, it was the government's desire to consider their options, which they did, and they announced that we will not go to Iran.
Well, thank you so much for all those inputs, because this book, as I mentioned, the critical thing is decision making in critical times, and I think that critical times for our subcontinent continue. So all the decisions that our government and our army and our air force and our navy takes are all critical for our future. We do continue to live in dangerous times in the subcontinent. Thank you, General N.C. Vijs, so much for talking to Frontline Conversations and being so candid and open, not just in your book, but in your views. I do hope that this book will be read, because this is, in a sense, it does shed light. In fact, even the end to the Kargil War, that's really interested me as to, what part of it was the bravery of Indian soldiers who dislodged the Pakistanis from there, and what part was the negotiated end, including that great visit that Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif made to the US to sign what I then described as a climb down agreement. Thank you, General Vijs, for talking.
I can say one sentence.
Please.
If we have dealt with the Pakistanis at length, we must learn one thing, that you cannot trust them.
Well,
Take precautions on that.
Well, yes. So that's a view from the General. And thank you so much for talking to Frontline Conversations.
Thank you. Thank you very much.